Introduction. A deception unveiled. The rich scent of coffee filled the room, but something felt off. Sitting at my sister-in-law Diane's dining table in her elegant Nashville home, I stared at the cup before me, my stomach twisting in suspicion. The metallic scent was faint, but undeniable. My name is Michael, and at 45 I never imagined I'd be questioning whether my own wife was trying to poison me. My marriage to Laura had once been solid, but over the past year, things had shifted. Late nights at work that never matched her pay stubs, secretive phone calls, and whispered conversations between her and Diane. At first I dismissed it, telling myself I was imagining things. But then, the accidental food poisonings started. A mild stomachache here, a dizzy spell there, always after meals Laura or Diane had prepared. Today, as Laura watched me closely, Diane stirring her own untouched coffee, I realized I couldn't ignore my instincts any longer. With a quick sleight of hand, I switched our cups. Diane took a sip, and within seconds, her fingers trembled. I leaned back in my chair, my pulse steady. I finally had the proof I needed. Chapter 1. The Taste of Betrayal. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the elegant dining room, but something felt off. I sat at my sister-in-law Diane's dining table, staring at the cup in front of me. The scent was faintly metallic, an unnatural sharpness hidden beneath the roasted beans. My name is Michael, and at 45, I never thought I'd be questioning whether my own wife was trying to poison me. Laura sat across from me, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly, her smile too poised, too calculated. Beside her, Diane watched me with quiet anticipation. I had ignored the signs for too long, the unexplained illnesses, the sudden dizzy spells, the emergency room visits with no clear diagnosis. But today my suspicions were no longer just paranoia. I had noticed small things over the past few months. Laura had become secretive, always stepping away to take calls. Diane and she had grown unusually close, whispering when they thought I wasn't paying attention. My health had mysteriously declined, only when I ate meals prepared by them. And now, this coffee. I lifted the cup, pretending to take a sip, all the while studying their expressions. Diane's fingers tapped against the porcelain, a subtle, impatient rhythm. Laura's eyes flickered toward Diane before returning to me, her gaze expectant. I smiled. This smells different today. Laura tilted her head. Oh? It's a new blend. Diane brought it back from a trip. Diane nodded, her voice smooth. Only the best for family. I swirled the cup slightly, the dark liquid shifting within. My stomach twisted, not just from the suspicion, but from the weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't just about me getting sick. It was about control. It was about Laura and Diane orchestrating something larger than just a simple case of food poisoning. I made my move. As I reached for my phone, pretending to check a message, I deliberately knocked into the table. The cups rattled, and in the confusion, I switched mine with Diane's. I looked up, feigning embarrassment. Sorry about that. Clumsy hands. Diane waved it off, reaching for her cup. No harm done. I watched as she lifted the cup to her lips. Time seemed to slow. She took a sip. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her fingers trembled. Her expression faltered, her mouth parting as if to speak, but no words came. A shadow of confusion crossed her face. "Diane?" Laura asked, concern creeping into her tone. Diane blinked rapidly. I don't feel..." She clutched the edge of the table, her breathing uneven. A thin layer of sweat formed on her brow. I set my untouched cup down. "Something wrong?" Laura's face paled. "Diane?" Diane's hands shook violently, her chair scraping against the floor as she tried to stand. But her legs failed her, and she slumped back down. Mark, her husband, rushed forward. "Diane, what's going on?" I leaned back, my heartbeat steady. "I'd say she's having a reaction." Laura turned to me sharply. "What did you do?" I raised an eyebrow. I drank my coffee, just like she did. Realization dawned in her eyes. You switched them. I nodded slowly. I did. Diane let out a weak, wheezing breath, her complexion turning ashen. Laura's panic deepened. Call an ambulance. Mark fumbled for his phone, dialing 911. I stayed where I was, calm, controlled. The game had changed. I had spent months being their target. But today, I became the one in control, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. As sirens wailed in the distance, I met Laura's gaze. Her eyes were wide with fear, realization sinking in. I smiled. It's over, Laura. Chapter 2. The truth unfolds. The wail of approaching sirens sent a chill through the room. Diane was slumped in her chair, her breathing ragged, her hands trembling as she clutched her chest. Laura was frozen, her usual poised demeanor cracking under the weight of the unfolding disaster. Mark hovered over Diane, his voice shaking as he spoke to the 911 dispatcher. She's barely responding. I don't know what's happening to her. I stood slowly, watching as the chaos unfolded. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The months of suspicion, the unexplained illnesses, the nights I had spent doubled over in pain, questioning my own body. It all led to this. Laura turned to me, her expression wild with desperation. Michael, you have to tell them what happened. I folded my arms. I think it's pretty obvious. She drank the coffee. Her breath hitched. You switched them. I tilted my head. I did. The paramedics burst through the door, their movements swift and efficient as they attended to Diane. One of them, a woman with a no-nonsense expression, knelt beside her, checking her vitals. What did she ingest? The paramedic asked. I spoke before Laura could. She had coffee, same as me. The paramedic's eyes darted toward the untouched cup in front of me. You didn't drink yours? No, I said evenly. Didn't feel like coffee today. Laura's face contorted with barely concealed rage. You set this up. I leaned in just slightly, lowering my voice. No, Laura, you did. The police arrived shortly after, a uniformed officer stepping inside with an air of authority. He surveyed the scene, his gaze narrowing on Diane's convulsing body before settling on me. You the husband? He asked. I nodded. Yes. Can you explain what happened? I sighed, as if deeply troubled. We were having brunch. Everything seemed fine. But then Diane started looking unwell, like she was having a reaction to something. I thought maybe it was the coffee. The officer's gaze shifted to the cup still sitting untouched in front of me. And you didn't drink yours? I shook my head. I had a bad feeling about it. Laura let out a strangled sound. This is ridiculous! He's trying to frame me! The officer turned to her. Frame you? For what exactly? She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her hands balling into fists. That was the thing about guilt. It always showed itself in silence. The paramedics lifted Diane onto a stretcher, securing an oxygen mask over her face as they wheeled her toward the door. Sir, the paramedic said to the officer, we need to move quickly. We'll need a toxicology screening to determine what she ingested. The officer nodded. We'll follow up at the hospital. He turned back to me. Would you be willing to come in for a statement? Of course, I said smoothly. Mark, still shell-shocked, finally turned to me. What are you saying, Michael? Are you trying to accuse them of something? I met his gaze evenly. I'm saying that someone has been poisoning me for months, and I think today it backfired. Mark's eyes flicked to Laura, uncertainty creeping into his features. That's insane. Laura would never... Then why was she so sure I switched the cups? I asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and damning. The officer motioned toward Laura. Ma'am, we'll need you to come with us as well. Laura's face drained of color. You can't be serious. I didn't... Let's not make this difficult, he said firmly. I watched as she hesitated, her mind racing. calculating. She had always been good at manipulation, at weaving stories to suit her needs. But this time, there were too many witnesses, too many questions she wouldn't be able to answer. She straightened, regaining some of her composure. Fine. As they led her toward the door, she turned back, her eyes locking onto mine with a promise of vengeance. "This isn't over, Michael," she said, her voice low and venomous. I smirked. "Oh, I think it is." And with that, she was gone. As I stepped out onto the porch, the weight on my chest lifted. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. Chapter 3. The investigation begins. I sat in the sterile, fluorescent-lit interrogation room of the Nashville Police Department, my hands resting on the cool metal table. The hum of a nearby air vent filled the silence, but my mind was anything but quiet. Detective Mendoza, a sharp-eyed woman with years of experience in domestic crime, studied me from across the table. Her fingers tapped rhythmically against her notepad. "So, Michael," she began, her voice calm but authoritative, "you believe your wife and sister-in-law have been poisoning you?" I met her gaze steadily. "I don't just believe it. I know it." She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me why." I exhaled slowly, gathering my thoughts. It started about a year ago. I'd come home after work, eat dinner with Laura, and within hours I'd feel off. Stomach pains, dizziness, nausea. At first I thought it was stress, or maybe something I ate elsewhere. But then it kept happening. Always after meals Laura prepared or after drinks she handed me. Mendoza jotted something down. "Did you seek medical attention?" I nodded. 3 times. The doctors never found anything definitive. They said it could be food poisoning or a mild allergy, but the symptoms were inconsistent. I hesitated before adding, "And then there were the incidents with Diane." Mendoza's brow furrowed. "Diane?" "My sister-in-law. Every time we had family brunches at her house, the same thing happened. I started to suspect Laura and Diane were working together." Mendoza exchanged a look with another officer in the room, then turned back to me. "And today, you switched the cups?" "Yes," I admitted, my voice steady. "And Diane was the one who reacted." The detective leaned back in her chair. "That's quite the coincidence." "It's not a coincidence," I countered. "It's proof." Mendoza flipped through her notes. "Your wife was visibly distressed when she was brought in for questioning. She insists you set her up." I let out a short laugh. "Of course, she'd say that. What else is she supposed to do? Confess?" She tilted her head, considering me. "We've sent Diane's blood work for toxicology testing. If there's anything suspicious, we'll know soon." I nodded. "That's all I need." A knock at the door interrupted us. Another officer entered, handing Mendoza a file. She opened it, scanning the contents. She looked up, her face unreadable. "Diane's toxicology report just came in." "You were right." A weight lifted off my chest. "The tests confirmed the presence of a neurotoxin," she continued. "It's not something you'd find in food naturally. This was deliberate." I let out a slow breath. "And now?" "We're securing warrants to search your home and Diane's," Mendoza replied. "If we find any traces of this toxin, it will strengthen our case. If we find more evidence, text messages, transactions, or hidden containers, it'll be even better." I nodded. "And Laura?" Mendoza closed the file. "She's still denying involvement, but given her reaction when we told her about the toxicology report, I wouldn't be surprised if she starts talking soon." I smirked. She always did crack under pressure. Mendoza stood. "We'll be in touch, Michael. If there's anything else you remember, now's the time." I met her gaze. "I've already told you everything I know. Now it's up to you." As I stepped out of the interrogation room, a sense of finality settled over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I was one step ahead. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over yet. Chapter 4. The truth unfolds. The next morning, I sat in my lawyer's office, sipping a bitter cup of black coffee while I waited for news. My lawyer, Daniel Harper, was an older man with sharp instincts and a reputation for being relentless. "They've executed the search warrants," he said, placing a thick file on his desk. "Detective Mendoza just called me. The police found something." My grip on the coffee cup tightened. "What did they find?" Daniel opened the file. "In Diane's house, they found small vials containing traces of the same neurotoxin found in her blood. They also recovered a burner phone. Guess who she was messaging frequently?" I clenched my jaw. "Laura." He nodded. "Text messages between them discussing doses and making sure it's not traceable. It's all here. This is more than suspicion now. It's undeniable proof." A mix of relief and anger surged through me. "So what happens next?" "The DA is preparing charges," Daniel said. "Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud. With the toxicology reports, the physical evidence, and the messages, they don't have much of a defense." I exhaled, but the weight on my chest hadn't fully lifted. "And Laura? What's she saying?" Daniel leaned back, adjusting his glasses. "She's still claiming she had no idea what Diane was doing. But given the messages, she's running out of plausible deniability." I scoffed. "She was part of this. I know she was." Daniel nodded. "It's just a matter of time before one of them turns on the other." The interrogation room. Later that afternoon, I was back at the police station, sitting outside the observation room. Through the two-way mirror, I watched as Detective Mendoza interrogated Laura. She looked different. Her usually flawless appearance was disheveled, her eyes red and puffy from crying. Her hands trembled as she clutched a tissue. "I don't understand," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt him." Mendoza's voice was calm but firm. "Then why did you discuss doses with Diane?" Laura shook her head quickly. I didn't know. She told me it was something harmless, just to make him sick for a while. I swear I didn't think—" "Didn't think what?" Mendoza pressed. "That slowly poisoning your husband over time wouldn't have consequences? That he wouldn't figure it out?" Tears streamed down Laura's face. "It was Diane's idea. She convinced me he was ruining my life, that he was taking everything from me, that I needed to level the playing field. I didn't think it would go this far." Mendoza exchanged a glance with another officer. "So, you're saying Diane was the mastermind?" Laura nodded frantically. "Yes, she planned everything. I just went along with it. I didn't want to, but she made me feel like I had no choice." Mendoza leaned back. "That's convenient, because Diane is saying the same thing about you." Laura's face paled. "What?" "She claims you were the one who came up with the idea, that you were the one adding the toxin to the drinks, and that she just provided the means." Laura's hands clenched into fists. "She's lying. She was obsessed with getting back at Michael for taking her promotion. I was just—" She stopped, realizing too late what she had just admitted. Mendoza smirked. "So you were involved." Laura covered her mouth, her entire body shaking. I stepped away from the mirror, my pulse pounding. I had wanted answers, but hearing the truth left a hollow ache in my chest. The woman I had once loved, who I had built a life with, had betrayed me in the worst way. And now, she was finally facing the consequences. The arrest. By the end of the day, Laura and Diane were both officially charged with attempted murder and conspiracy. The weight of it all still felt surreal as I walked out of the station. I wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain. This chapter of my life was finally coming to an end, and for the first time in a long time, I was free. Chapter 5. The Trial and the Aftermath. The Courtroom Showdown. The trial began 3 months later, and the media coverage was relentless. Headlines like, "Cheating Wife and Best Friend Tried to Poison Husband for Promotion," and Betrayal, Greed, and Poison, a story of deception, spread across the news. I sat in the courtroom, watching as the prosecution presented the overwhelming evidence against Laura and Diane. The messages between them, the recovered vials of neurotoxins, and the toxicology reports all painted a clear picture of their intentions. Laura looked nothing like the woman I had married. The confidence, the arrogance, it was gone. She avoided my gaze, staring down at her lap, while her lawyer desperately tried to salvage what little dignity she had left. Diane, on the other hand, kept her cold, calculating expression. She refused to admit guilt, attempting to twist the story in her favor. "She's lying," Diane insisted when questioned about the text messages. "Laura was the one who brought up poisoning him first. I thought it was a joke. I never thought she would actually do it." The prosecutor smirked, holding up a printout of one of the messages. "So, when you said, 'Make sure he drinks it this time, we can't afford another screw-up,' you thought that was a joke?" Diane faltered, but then attempted to regain her composure. "It was taken out of context." The jury didn't buy it. Laura's final plea. When it was Laura's turn to testify, she finally broke down. "I didn't want to hurt him," she sobbed. I was stupid. I listened to Diane. I let my anger get the best of me, and I made the worst mistake of my life." Her lawyer tried to paint her as a victim, manipulated, pressured, and emotionally unstable, but the evidence was too strong. The texts, the financial records, the toxicology results. There was no spinning it. When the prosecutor cross-examined her, the final nail in her coffin was driven in. "Mrs. Bennett, you claim you were pressured into this, but let's be clear. At any point, did Diane physically force you to participate?" Laura shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No." "And yet, you willingly sent messages about poisoning your husband? You were aware of the substances being used, and you allowed him to be hospitalized multiple times without saying anything?" She didn't respond. The courtroom was silent. The verdict. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. Laura and Diane were found guilty of attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. The judge, unimpressed by their excuses, handed down a severe sentence, 20 years in prison for both of them, with no possibility of parole for at least 15. As the verdict was read, I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just exhaustion. This wasn't justice in the way I had hoped. Justice would have been never needing to be here in the first place. Laura gave me one final look before being led out in handcuffs. There was no more defiance, no more confidence, just regret. But it was too late for that. Moving forward. After the trial, I focused on rebuilding my life. The betrayal had shaken me to my core, but I refused to let it define me. I took a leave of absence from work, traveled for a while, and spent time with people who actually cared about me. Slowly, I learned to trust again. 6 months after the trial, I received an email from a former client, the Henderson account, the one Diane had tried to sabotage me over. They were offering me a promotion. I smiled, realizing that in the end, the people who had tried to bring me down had only destroyed themselves. Life had moved on, and so had I. Chapter 6. A New Beginning. Rebuilding from the ashes. After everything that happened, I was left to pick up the pieces of my life. My marriage was over, my trust in the people closest to me had been shattered, and my sense of security had been completely uprooted. But I wasn't broken. In the months following the trial, I took time to focus on myself. Therapy became a regular part of my routine, helping me process the betrayal and regain my confidence. I learned to separate my past from my future, to not let the actions of two selfish individuals dictate my happiness. I moved out of the house I had shared with Laura. It was filled with too many painful memories, reminders of whispered conversations, hidden agendas, and near-deadly breakfasts. I found a modern apartment in downtown Nashville, with large windows and an open floor plan that felt refreshing, like a clean slate. For the first time in years, I felt free. Professional triumph. Despite Diane and Laura's attempt to sabotage me, my career soared. The Henderson account, the very project they had tried to poison me over, turned into one of the biggest deals in my company's history. The executive board recognized my dedication, my resilience, and my ability to handle high-pressure situations. 6 months after the trial, I was promoted to senior marketing director. The irony wasn't lost on me. Diane and Laura had conspired to ruin me, but in the end, they had only accelerated my success. Closure comes in unexpected ways. One evening, as I was leaving work, my phone buzzed with a familiar name. It was an email from Laura. I hesitated before opening it. Christina, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I needed to reach out. I've had a lot of time to think in here, and I see now how badly I hurt you. I let my ambition and my resentment get the best of me, and I became someone I don't even recognize. I don't expect you to respond. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry. Truly. I hope one day you find it in your heart to move past what I did to you. You deserve happiness. I stared at the message for a long time, emotions conflicting within me. Anger, pain, but also relief. Not because I forgave her, but because I realized I didn't need her apology. I had already moved on. I didn't respond. Instead, I closed the email, turned off my phone, and walked outside to the crisp night air. For the first time in a long time, I felt light, looking to the future. A year after the trial, I stood on the stage at a business leadership conference, addressing a room full of ambitious professionals. My success didn't come from luck. It came from preparation, from resilience, and from understanding one simple truth. Sometimes, the biggest threats to our success come from those closest to us. But the real power lies in how we choose to respond. I scanned the audience, meeting the eyes of young entrepreneurs, business leaders, and professionals who had faced their own struggles. I could have let betrayal break me. Instead, I let it fuel me. And today I stand before you, stronger than ever. The room erupted in applause. I smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning. Final thoughts. Diane and Laura would spend the next 2 decades behind bars, living with the consequences of their choices. Meanwhile, I was free. Free to build the life I deserved. Free to find happiness on my own terms. And that, I realized, was the best revenge of all. Life lessons from betrayal, strength, preparation, and moving forward. In 2025, resilience is more important than ever. This story teaches us that betrayal, no matter how painful, can be a catalyst for growth. The key to overcoming adversity lies in preparation, emotional strength, and trusting your instincts. Financial independence and self-reliance are crucial, especially in relationships. Sometimes those closest to us can become our biggest obstacles, but how we respond defines our future. Rather than seeking revenge, true power comes from rising above the situation, rebuilding stronger, and proving that success is the best way to move forward. Never let betrayal define your story. Let it empower you.